The Sahara, one of the hottest places on Earth. There are no trees, no rivers, only hundreds of miles of scorching sand in every direction. It's a far cry from the northeast of England, but for some Geordies, this is almost a second home. The reason for the link is the people who live here, the Sahrawis. 165,000 people surviving against all odds in one of the world's most inhospitable environments. It's an enforced survival. They're here because they have nowhere else to go. The Sahrawis are refugees. These children were not even born when their parents were forced from their lands on the Atlantic coast by a Moroccan invasion 23 years ago. Their song is a plea for peace and the right to return to homes they have never seen. They long to climb trees and swim in the sea, though for now they only know the desert, unseen and forgotten by the world. But 3,000 miles away, there is one place where their plight is not ignored. For the past 6 years, volunteers across the northeast have been organising convoys of aid for the Sahrawi people. The unlikely nerve centre for the operation is an electrical repair shop in the metro centre, run by Ron and Camelia Leybourne.
We are both members of Newcastle Friendship Force, and there was a meeting called concerning the refugee camps. I attended, Ron couldn't. When I told him what it was about, he then recalled having seen a documentary.
I saw this documentary about 3 or 4 years prior to being invited to this meeting. And at the end of the documentary, it almost made me cry. It was so heartrending. But of course, you know, when you see these things on TV, you think, well, you know, what can I do about it? And in effect, at that time, I couldn't do anything. So when we heard about it again, I then began to realize that we could do something about it. And that's how we first started to get involved with Rainbow Rovers Tyneside.
We bought an old Land Rover and we painted it in rainbow colours, and we went to Bladen and around the shopping precinct saying, have your name put on this Land Rover for £1, it's going out to the refugees. And that was how we really first began, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In the end, 3 vehicles full of supplies were driven down to the Sahara. Since that first convoy in 1992, the Tyneside group has organised 3 more. The latest has brought together 29 vehicles from all over the UK. After a 3-day drive from Newcastle, the vehicles assemble on the dockside of the southern Spanish port of Alicante.
The first part of the journey is quite straightforward, and it's when you get to Alicante, where you get on the Algerian ferry, you start to realise, you know, you're going from one world to a different world altogether, because the Algerian ferry, in effect, is part of Algeria, and that's when the adventure really starts.
This year's cargo includes water purification systems and thousands of pairs of confiscated counterfeit jeans with a street value of over £1 million. The convoy also includes 2 busloads of Americans, members of the Newcastle-based Friendship Force. As well as contributing financially, they want to learn more about the refugees' plight at first hand. Armed with this experience, they hope to raise awareness back home and pressure the American government to support the Sahrawi struggle for freedom. For now, the priority is not international diplomacy, but sleep. After 3 days' drive across Europe, they can at least leave the navigation and driving to someone else tonight.
I guess we're probably about halfway there, and we're almost at the end of the Mediterranean crossing. It's the roughest crossing that I've been on. I don't think anybody has been sick yet. We've got about 1,200 miles to go down to the camps, which will take us it'll take us 3 days.
But from the moment the ferry started to unload at the port of Oran in northern Algeria, Ron's optimism looked increasingly misplaced.
Disembarking is always a problem. It's getting the heavy vehicles off and the ramps are the wrong way round or the tide's not the right tide. But the nerve centre of the whole thing, the catering bus, because we need to be fed, has got stuck on the ramp because the tide's too high and the angle of the ramp won't allow the bus down without damaging the sump. So we've had to wait a little bit until the tide rises, bring the ramp up, and then we've got the good angle to get the bus off. So just one of those little problems that keep us all on our toes.
Thankfully, the rest of the unloading was more straightforward, and the next hurdle was clearing all the vehicles through customs and immigration.
Well, we're going through the customs and we've arranged for a police escort. They'll take us just outside the town and then hopefully we'll get the Algerian military to escort us right the way through. So it's looking good.
Unfortunately, to the Algerian military, things weren't looking as good as they appeared to Tom. The country is in the middle of a brutal civil war. The official UK government advice to Britons is to stay well away, but without any alternative route, it was advice the Tyneside volunteers had been forced to ignore. Not surprisingly, the Algerian government had arranged an armed escort for the convoy. But even as the immigration checks were underway, the head of the Saharawi Aid Trust, Lord Winchelsea, better known to his friends as Chris, was being informed of a change of plans.
Can we get everybody upstairs? I have to make an announcement.
It appeared that the Algerian government had decided that the road to Tindouf on the border with Western Sahara was just too dangerous.
Upstairs? Yes, please. Are we all together? Well, I'm sorry to have to say what I'm about to say, but I have to say it, and there's no alternative to it. The decision has been made by the Algerian authorities that we are not to drive our vehicles to Tindouf. So instead, we are being taken down to Tindouf on a military aircraft with all our personal belongings and baggage. The vehicles will be delivered to us in 4 or 5 days, so it's not that much longer than it would have taken us anyway to drive there.
Saharawi drivers would now be driving the convoy vehicles through the desert. All the British drivers could do was hurriedly pack essentials for the next few days and try to hide their disappointment.
I think everybody's disappointed about this drive. I think everybody's keyed up and looking forward to driving across the Atlas Mountains and through the desert. And that's obviously got a lot of disappointment and will be a talking point for some time. But I think we've got to all focus our objectives on the main aim of getting this essential aid to the Saharawi people. And if this is a way to do it, then our enjoyment comes second.
As they filed onto the buses to the airfield, most could understand the Algerian concerns. No country wants to risk a massacre of 52 elderly Americans by religious extremists.
My name is Otto DeLucia, and I live in a little town near Philadelphia, USA. So I am disappointed. I did want to go through the desert for those 2 or 3 days, but what can I do? I've traveled all over the world. So I always expect the unexpected. Like this one right now, we're flying instead of going through the desert.
The nearby Air Force base was not exactly geared up to providing charter flights for visiting foreigners. To be fair, they'd laid on an enormous Russian-built military transport aircraft and a crew to fly it. But the baggage handling was do-it-yourself, and the seat allocation first come, first served. Although this was not how the group thought they'd be travelling to the refugee camps, it was nevertheless a flight they'd never forget. Touchdown at the remote Algerian outpost of Tindouf. From here, the last leg of the journey would be by bus across scorching sands to the refugee camps a further 50 kilometres into the desert. As the Tyneside volunteers were bussed through the desert to the camps, last-minute preparations were underway for an unforgettable welcome. Everyone was there. There were those old enough to remember freedom, and those who had been born and lived their whole lives in exile. Saharawi children only know about their homeland from the stories told by their parents and grandparents. Although without their precious cargo of aid, the very presence of the visitors was enough to reassure the refugees that they were not forgotten. For some, it was the chance to renew friendships and to celebrate the culmination of months of hard work and organisation. For others, it was a totally new experience and one they would never forget.
A new little friend from the Western Sahara. And another little friend from the Western Sahara. Aren't they beautiful?
Another friend here.
Another friend? You speak English? This is wonderful. I've already got an interpreter. Yes. I've got 4 friends now from the Western Sahara.
This was Ron and Camelia's 4th visit to the camps.
It's home from home for us.
The feeling's still there. We're still so pleased to be here.
We don't like the place, we just like the people. You know? And that's what it's all about, really.
So we're just thrilled to be here, ready for a cup of tea.
Although Chris Winchelsea has been championing the Sahrawi struggle for over 10 years, the warmth of the welcome never fails to move him.
I feel as though I'm coming home. I've come here so many times, and I have got a lot of friends here. But I do feel as though I'm coming home. And many people ask me, don't you feel odd leaving civilization behind you? And I say, on the contrary, I think I'm arriving in civilization. For all of the deprivations and all of the problems that they haven't lost sight of, I think, the true value, the meaning of life. And I think they're absolutely lovely, delightful people. And I have endless admiration for them. And they've done so much to help themselves. And I care about them.
With the festivities over, the visitors left to meet the families whose lives and homes they would be sharing for the next 7 days. This was the first visit by ordinary Americans. The Sahrawis are keenly aware that American interest offers their best hope for a return home. And it's thanks to the Newcastle-based Friendship Force that the link was made to the highest levels of the American government.
I have to say that it is through the connection that I established with Newcastle in the northeast that the whole Friendship Force became involved. And it became involved through one person, one man, and his wife, Ron and Camelia Laybourne, and who are lifelong members of the Friendship Force. And they introduced me to it. And through them, I was able to go to Atlanta and in Georgia, and I spoke to their president, Wayne Smith, and he introduced me to ex-president Jimmy Carter. And we told him about the whole problem in detail. He knew about it in principle. He knew about it, the problems. And he telephoned an old friend of his in New York, James Baker, who I remember was George Bush's Secretary of State. And he was appointed by the UN as their special envoy to get this problem sorted out. And he's making progress at last.
In the morning, there'd be a briefing on the latest developments, but for now, it was time to relax after an extraordinary day.
Good morning. First of all, I have to thank you very much for coming and to join my voice to all those who have expressed to you our warm welcomes and our thanks for the efforts you have done to be here with you, to share with you some days the life which is imposed to us since 1975. And in 1975,
it was in 1975 that Morocco invaded the Western Sahara, forcing the Sahrawis to flee. Half the population found refuge in this barren and deserted corner of Algeria. Those who have been left behind have suffered terrible oppression under the occupying forces. Families have been unable to contact each other for 23 years. But the Sahrawis have never given up their struggle for freedom. Though vastly outnumbered, they've fought back against the invaders. Many thousands have died or been taken prisoner. But since 1991, the UN has successfully intervened to bring about a fragile ceasefire. Under the guidance of Special Envoy James Baker, the UN has set up voting centres across the country, at which the Sahrawis will be able to vote either for independence or to become part of Morocco. But although the centres are staffed and guarded by multinational forces, they have never been used. Despite initially agreeing to the vote, the Moroccans have continually obstructed it. Everyone knows that should a free and fair referendum go ahead, the Sahrawis will vote unanimously for an independent state. It remains to be seen whether the UN can make Morocco comply with the agreements it signed. It is the Sahrawis' only hope for a peaceful and permanent solution and an end to their life in exile. Until that day comes, the Sahrawis will continue to rely on the support of organisations like Rainbow Rovers Tyneside.
I have a taxi business in Baillie, and I go to the National Federation of Taxi Cab conferences, and this guy, who we all thought was a professional bum, Chris Winchelsea, the Earl of Winchelsea in Nottingham, used to say, "Davy, do you think you could raise money for a Land Rover or to buy some Land Rover parts to go out the desert?" And to be perfectly honest with you, we thought he was a screwball. We really thought he'd flipped. And then he gave me a video and a book. He said, "Read that and watch that." And that was me hooked.
This is David's fourth visit to the camps. By now, he and the family he stays with are old friends.
Well, this is the son of the family. His father's away. Mama, his mother's looked after us tremendously for the last week. Absolutely brilliant. This is another son, and these are the grandchildren. This is one of the daughters, and I mean, look at this face. Is that beautiful? Launch 1,000 ships. They're just wonderful. 2 slices of bread and you could eat any of them. Love it. Well, we're up 7 o'clock. That's one of the coolest parts of the day. And we always get a very good breakfast, bread, jam, coffee, Saharawi tea. And then, because we're only here for a short time, we're into all sorts of things. We go and visit the hospitals, the schools. They've done tremendously well without any raw materials, really. All the buildings, sand and water, the tents, meticulously cleaned every day. Absolutely wonderful.
To the Sahrawis, the most important buildings in the camps are the schools. They know their children are their future. A whole generation has grown up in exile here. But it is this same generation that will someday have to rebuild their nation. But none of this would be possible without the support of volunteers and donors in places like the northeast of England. This year's convoy is not only carrying 20,000 pens, but a computer and software to ensure that Sahrawi children are as well equipped for the new millennium as those in Sunderland. But what the convoy can't deliver is the freedom to see the world beyond the camps.
Half these kids haven't seen a tree, a blade of grass. And I think they'd love to go to the seaside or a swimming pool. Yeah. But they're so sweet, the kids. They're very grateful anything you give them. You come to a child with a toy or a sweet and they look at you and then the smile comes.
Like most families, Stan's hosts have built a mud brick kitchen and bathroom, but tents provide the main space for living.
We're now preparing tea, Saharawi tea. It's like gunpowder tea. And she pours into glasses back in the pot till you get a froth on, just like a pint of beer actually. But this is the traditional drink of the Saharawi people. And it's customary to drink About 3 glasses of this.
Other ingredients of the local diet are also a little different from home, but inside the tents, some things can seem quite familiar.
This carpet reminds me of proggy mats my mother made in the northeast of England some 40 years ago. They're made in the same tradition with rags and progged through canvas, and it was rather amazing to come here today and find this and take me right back to my childhood.
That evening, the Saharawi drivers arrived with the convoy at Tindouf. In the morning, the British could finally drive their vehicles into the camps. The vehicles themselves are just as valuable as their loads. For the present, they'll be used to ferry people and supplies between the different refugee camps. But their most important role will be when they're used to take the Saharawi people on the long-awaited journey back to the homes and families they last saw 23 years ago. No one knows when that will be. Supporters like Ron and Camelia are well aware that the Moroccans may yet sabotage the referendum. If they do, the hard work of organising support for the Sahrawis will begin again. Once more, the ordinary people of the northeast will step in to give life and hope to a people all but forgotten by the rest of the world.
I feel that by bringing in ordinary people who lead ordinary lives, who work at home and they have their own families, and you know, maybe they will become really involved, and maybe they will write to people that are in a position to do something about it. That's really the idea behind it. And if enough people do that, then I think maybe some attention will be paid. You know, well, what are we doing? What is the answer? What are we doing about this situation out here, which is appalling? For 23 years, these poor people have had to live in this godforsaken place. Why? Really, basically, because we don't care. At least governments don't care, but ordinary people do.
We need more people to come so that when they go back, they can tell the word. Just tell the world about these forgotten people. I mean, I've spoken to Rotary clubs for the last 3 months before I've come here, and nobody has heard of them. Terrible, terrible. But this is my 4th time, and I will keep on coming back and going back and telling the world about these forgotten people.